Welcome to the Tuesday, a very special Tuesday edition of the Sharp Football Show. We're going to be breaking down the entire college football playoff bracket with our college football expert, Ryan McCrystal. We're going to be digging into all of the matchups that we know of right now, and then we're going to be marching through, just like they do March Madness for the NCAA championships, working our way through to the semifinals, to the finals, and then to crown our ultimate champion. By the time the show is over, we are going to have for you who we think is going to win the college football playoffs. So I'm excited to break these games down with you. It's obviously an exciting time of year. We've got the holidays coming up, Christmas, New Year's, etc. But then, of course, we also have tons of football. We've got the college football playoffs. We've got the bowl games. We've then march into the NFL playoffs. Great time of year to be a football fan, that's for sure. They start putting games on every day of the week. You're going to be able to watch football from now probably through the next 3 weeks, I imagine, at least. So it's a great time of year to be a football fan. Exile said it best right there. If you guys want to participate in our show, if you want to contribute to the chat, you want to ask Ryan questions as he's walking through these games, I will interject and share some of those questions that you might have for him. The best way to do that is head on over to YouTube. I know we're streaming live on X as well, but head on over to YouTube, subscribe to the Sharp Football Show, and you can contribute and participate in the chat live over there. We'll pop up your comments here on the screen, and we will ask your questions of Ryan. This is usually an NFL focused show, but we're going in this direction because it is time for college football playoffs. That said, there is one quick topic that I do want to get to in the NFL, and this is just another example of buffoonery by Rogers League as to what happened at the end of this Washington Commanders New Orleans Saints game. Let's bring up that video. I'm sure you guys have seen this by now. So I don't know if you can make this a little bigger, zoom in on the picture there in the middle of the screen, Matt, if you can. But what you should see here is the game clock. We're just going to play this on repeat. The Saints had a fourth down. They needed to convert that in order to get a new set of downs so they could try to score at the end of the game. Being down 20-3, they needed to get a touchdown here, obviously, to get back into the game, to tie it with an extra point attempt or to get the 2-point conversion attempt to win this game. And what you'll notice that I noticed live watching this game, because we had the Washington Commanders in a teaser, as a lot of other people did as well. So we needed the Commanders to prevent the Saints from scoring a touchdown. So I'm focused on this from a slightly different lens, a more interested lens, if you will, because I care more about the outcome of this game than some casual fans who aren't fans of either one of these teams. But anybody can see the clock get froze at 9 seconds. And the clear signal here in terms of that, how long it's frozen for, is look at the play clock. Tick down. 39, 38, 37, 36, 35, and then the game clock starts going. This is at least 3 seconds, if not more. I've seen some people, I timed it with my stopwatch. You can look at the play clock and you can see how much time is clicking off here. The bottom line here is, yes, the Saints got this snap off in time, but by the time they spiked the ball and the officials stopped the game clock, there should have been zeros on the clock. There should not have been 3 seconds left. The play clock ticks down at least 3 seconds before it moves. The game should have been over. The game final score should have been 20-13. We are up big on the season from a betting perspective. I am up big on the season from a personal betting perspective. I can afford to lose the Washington Commanders in a teaser, which we had teased to the Minnesota Vikings. That's not the point that we could afford to lose this bet. The point is, The Commanders almost lost this game due to the league inexplicably and mistakenly, according to the official, stopping the clock. How does replay assist not get involved in this? I'm sitting at my house live watching this 9 seconds sit on the screen for several seconds. There is no reason that after that final, that the quarterback, Jake Haener, well, actually it was Rattler at the time, spikes the ball, that the league couldn't use replay assist to realize that instead of 3 seconds, the game should have been over. Replay assist should have gotten involved. If I can see it live, who the hell is there either at the league office that could buzz in, or the guys there standing there live, the officials? One of the guys that mistakenly stopped it, then they started it again. You could see him running in from the bottom of the screen, waving his hands to stop it. He should have never done that. I don't know if he's a college official or whatnot. You don't stop the clock in the NFL on a first down. Hockey League comes out afterwards and says, we made a mistake. I don't know what to tell you. A mistake was made here. You've got to get replay assist to come in and correct that mistake. If something like this were to happen in the playoffs and a team advances as a result of the refs mistakenly stop the clock, if you could go back and correct a variety of other types of penalties or spots or catches or no catches or things of that nature using replay assist right now, how could you not actually correct the clock issue that I am seeing live? And many others did as well, especially guys that were covering the Redskins or the Commanders. I saw a lot of those guys during the course of the game tweet about the 9 seconds, and the clock was stopped as well. So just another example of the league having a system. It's called replay assist. They use it for a variety of things. How are you not using it for something as critical as we almost got the wrong team winning this game? The wrong team almost won the game. There should have been no time left on the clock. So that sucks for us losing a bet here. That's the immediate ramifications. But it's also obviously massive for the league itself as we enter the postseason here, something that they could easily fix and correct. Okay, enough about that. Let's look and see if there's any comments here. Chase likes the first quarter Packers bet. Another winner from that. Yes, indeed. They're going to host the Saints. It'll be interesting to see what that line is on that first quarter bet this week. The Josh Allen ladder, yes, that was nice. The Bears O-line going to get Caleb hurt. Should they sit Caleb for the rest of the season? I will talk about this real quick, Tony. That was your comment for a second there. I know a lot of people around the league have a lot of respect for Thomas Brown. Thomas Brown was given the reins for play calling for Bryce Young for a period of time last year. And it was terrible. And then they took the play calling back from Thomas Brown. Thomas Brown is calling plays now for the Chicago Bears. I've said this before. Chicago should have never allowed Matt Eberflus to be there, for a play caller to be there who doesn't know how to help a rookie quarterback transition into the NFL. But they're actually making it worse now. Caleb Williams looks horrible right now. He can't see the field right. They keep calling these run plays. They're down by like 20 points, 13 points, what have you. They were getting crushed by the San Francisco 49ers. They're getting crushed by the Minnesota Vikings. They keep calling these early down run plays that are doing nothing but setting up third and obvious passing situations, which Caleb Williams is walking right into and getting destroyed. Sack, fumbled, hit, blown up, terrible reads of the defense because defensive coordinators get creative because of the obvious passing situation. You got to pass the ball a little bit more here on early downs. The easiest time to pass the ball is on first down, where the defense might be expecting a run. Do you know that their play action rate is down at the bottom of the NFL right now? Like, I want to say the last 2 weeks since he took over as interim head coach, Thomas Brown, the Bears' play action rate might be either bottom 2 or 3 in the NFL. They have no disguise to help get any semblance of an early down passing game for Caleb Williams. And I just think keeping Matt Eberflus was a problem, but having Thomas Brown involved is a problem too. In Carolina, research what happened in Carolina. They tried to make it look like Bryce Young could be fixed with Thomas Brown. Everybody on Twitter went wild. Hey, Thomas Brown's going to be here and save Bryce Young. He got worse. It looked bad. The head coach took back the play calling duties. Now Thomas Brown is in Chicago, and Caleb Williams looks worse with Thomas Brown being more involved like he is right now. It's a problem. So, yes, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name in Dagino Eco. Sorry about that. But yes, they messed up on the clock in that Saints game. They allowed the Commanders to kick a field goal after the quarter had expired. So the clock ticked down to zeros on the clock before the ball was snapped on a field goal attempt. The field goal attempt was missed. They then went back and right then and there corrected the clock. They said the quarter had ended before the attempt was made. It is now the fourth quarter. I think it was between the third and the fourth quarter. And so then they switched fields, started the fourth quarter with the field goal attempt, which he made. Saints fans were mad about, oh, well, how could you let that? They did the right thing. They ultimately did the right thing, right? They corrected the clock. They should not have allowed the field goal attempt because the clock was on zeros. I'm sorry that he missed it. If he had made it, you would have been upset as well. The point is, let's get it right. The right decision is that there was no snap because the clock was at zeros. They fixed that one in real time, but for some reason they couldn't fix this one at the end of the game in real time. Boggles the mind as to the lack of consistency there. I agree, Alex. It is inexplicable in an era of sports betting and an era of more people focused on the games that something like that could have happened. It is one of the most illogical endings to a game that I have seen from a this should have never happened type ending. There's no excuse for something like this to happen. It has to be corrected. But to me, it's beyond. Sports betting is like the icing on the cake for all of us. And it impacts sports betting massively. But this is the cake itself. This is the NFL itself. Even if there was no sports betting, to allow the Saints to possibly win that game and the ramifications of that, but more importantly, like if something like that were to happen in the playoffs and a team either regular season makes the playoffs or misses the playoffs, or in the playoffs advances versus doesn't advance because of we mistakenly stopped the clock, and you can't fix that in real time. You can't go back before the game is over and say, hey, we fucked this up. There should have been no time left on the clock after the spike. The game is now over. No, people would have been mad. Oh, the Saints fans were, oh, this is too bad for us. But the reality is what is right ended up happening. And that's all we care about. What is the right decision? Make sure that happens. The refs across the board, just get it right. We love replay assist because you can help us get it right. Start implementing replay assist for face masks to help us get it right. Okay, enough about that. Let us go into the playoffs here for college football. And this is the star of the show, Ryan McCrystal. Let's go ahead and bring Ryan McCrystal in. And we're going to walk through our inaugural college football playoff pick'em. I'm super excited to break this down with our college football expert who has been studying college football year-round now. Ryan, at one point in time, you dug deep into props for us and you were crushing NFL props as well. But now you've gone back to your bread and butter, the NFL draft. So you're studying the college guys year-round. You're preparing for the NFL draft. You're helping us pick winning bets for the NFL draft. You're very accurate from a mock draft perspective. Many of you guys, if you just tuned in during this season, you don't know this, but Ryan McCrystal is at the forefront of mock draft accuracy over the last 7-8 years at least. Since I've known him, he's been one of the top 5 to 10 guys in terms of mock draft accuracy in the nation. And that's obviously he's studying college football, and then he's just matching up teams and decision making for the first round of the college football of the NFL draft. But then now he's been picking games for us, finished with a very profitable record during the regular season coming on our Friday show. And now he's going to turn his attention to the college football playoff bracket. So Ryan, before I get into this, I do want to let people know that we are going to be talking about betting the first round of the college football playoff games this Friday. So Ryan's not going to come and tell you what bets from an ATS or total perspective to make on the first round games. We're going to be talking about that on Friday's show in just a few days. But what I do want to ask you, Ryan, before we kick this off, and maybe our producer can show up the bracket on the screen with us off to the side, I am curious, Ryan, do you have any futures bets without tipping your hand in terms of actually your picks? But is there anything that stands out to you from a value perspective, or do you want to save those for a little bit later in the show once you've unveiled the entire bracket and you could talk a little bit about some of the bets you think people should make from a futures perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're in the futures market for the college football playoff, the way to do it is to just sort of look towards the long shots. There's just not enough value if you're betting on Oregon or Georgia at the very top. They're the pretty heavy favorites. But I would, if you want to take a long shot bet, look at who, if one upset happens, what's the chain reaction? Does it set up an easier path for somebody? So the one team that I would highlight that I think that works out for is Tennessee. They have a brutal path to go through Ohio State and Oregon. But if they show up, if their defense is clicking on all cylinders, they could win a close, low scoring game against either of those teams. And if they were to come out of there, suddenly with those two wins on their resume, they'd have a pretty strong argument for being the best team left. So I would look to Tennessee as one of the long shot bets that, yeah, they do have to pull off two pretty big upsets, but they've played well all season long. If they did pull it off, suddenly they're probably jumping to the top. It would be too late to bet them at that point. So if you like Tennessee, especially if you do like them in the first round game, because that should be a close matchup. If you like that matchup for Tennessee, I would go ahead and place a little something on the long shot bet because their odds are pretty long right now.
Indeed, they are. Okay, let's get started down in that lower left-hand quadrant of the screen. And we're going to be talking about, are they ever, I guess there's not enough teams here to have the different, call each one of these regions something different. So we're just going to say the lower left-hand, we'll call this the orange region. We've got Texas, the 5th seed, against Clemson, the 12th seed. You're going to go ahead and break this game down for us and advance one of these two teams. Can you tell us what you think we're going to get out of this first round matchup when these two foes take on one another, and then who you think ultimately advances?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Texas is very heavily favored in this game. Clemson wouldn't even be in the field if not for winning the ACC, which, they needed a strange chain reaction of events happening. Syracuse pulling off that big upset against Miami at the end of the season, even just to get into the ACC championship game, and then upsetting SMU. Clemson kind of doesn't really belong, but because we've seen Texas have some struggles on offense at times this year, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of an upset. That said, I'm going to take Texas in this game. You need to run the ball against Clemson. That's the key. We've talked about it a number of times on the show this year. Teams that run the ball well, they are able to handle Clemson. That hasn't necessarily been a consistent strength of Texas, but they do have a great offensive line. Trey Wisner has been getting better as the season has gone on, so they should be able to run the ball. And like I said, this Clemson run defense is awful. They rank 94th in yards before contact allowed. They rank 101st in yards after contact allowed. It's pretty easy to run the ball against them with a good offensive line. I think Texas should be able to do it. So, regardless, even if they don't have a dominant performance offensively, I think Texas's defense just shuts them down completely. Clemson, I think, matches up pretty well with Texas A&M in terms of strengths and weaknesses from what we've seen. And, just a couple of weeks ago, we saw Texas completely shut down Texas A&M, held them scoreless on offense. They only scored on a pick six in that game. In fact, Texas over the last 2 weeks against Texas A&M and Georgia, two pretty good teams, they've only allowed one offensive touchdown in regulation to those two opponents. So the defense, as much as we've talked about Quinn Ewers and some of the struggles he's had lately, the defense is peaking at the right moment. They've been fantastic. So I don't think Clemson is going to be able to put enough points on the scoreboard. Maybe it's a close, low-scoring game, like a 17-7 kind of game, like we saw from Texas A&M. But I don't think Clemson ever really gets close enough to be a real threat to win the game. So I'm going to have Texas advancing in this first-round matchup.
All right, so we've got Texas advancing to take on Arizona State there. It'll set up a 4-5 matchup. Texas favored by 12 points, total sitting at 51.5 in that Texas-Clemson first-round game. And Ryan has Texas advancing in a game where he thinks Clemson's offense may struggle to get going enough against that Longhorns defense. Okay, now let's switch up to the top left graphic. We talked a little bit earlier, a top left region. We talked earlier about the Tennessee Volunteers. Now they're going to be taking on Ohio State. Ohio State right now in the betting markets favored by 7.5 points. The total sits at 47 points. Is taking a little bit of under money. I actually do see a 46 on the screen, Ryan. The winner of this game will get to play Oregon. We should note for everybody who is new to the college football playoff, which we all are, but hasn't studied it as much from a betting perspective, that these first round games that we're discussing here all are held at the lower seeds home field. So the Texas game is being held in Austin. The Ohio State game is held in Columbus. After that, all of the games then are being played at a neutral site in a bowl setting. So Tennessee versus Ohio State, Ryan, who do you have winning this game? What do you think about how these two teams match up with one another?
Yeah, like you said earlier, we're going to talk more specifics about each of these matchups and some betting angles later in the week. So the one thing I wanted to address with this game is sort of the question that I think some people have about Ohio State's focus. Coming off that crushing loss to Michigan, I think a lot of the people who think Tennessee are going to win this game have been talking about Ohio State's ability to just sort of refocus their energy on the playoff and get past that devastating loss. And so the question is, can they do that? Can Ryan Day get his team focused on the next game and just put that Michigan loss behind them, their fourth straight loss to Michigan? The fact that it's been 4 straight years, though, as much as that kills Ohio State fans to know that they're riding that losing streak, it kind of helps them potentially because they've been in this situation a bunch of times, having to refocus after a loss to Michigan. Just last year against Missouri in the Cotton Bowl, they had a bunch of opt-outs. Obviously, they lost Kyle McCord to the transfer portal in the first quarter of that game. Their backup quarterback, Devin Brown, gets injured. They had to turn to their third stringer, Lincoln Kleinholtz, who was completely unprepared to be in that moment. They had absolutely no offense. But late in that game, in the fourth quarter, they were winning 3-0. So the defense, which didn't have as many opt-outs and didn't have any big injuries affecting their performance, they showed up and shut down a great Missouri offense in that game. They ended up losing 14-3, but the defense showed up, and the offense, they were just crushed by injuries, and that was why they couldn't really move the ball at all at that point. But they seemed motivated. Like the defense fully showed up ready to play. And then 2 years ago, they made the playoffs. So a little bit more of a similar situation to what we have now when they played Georgia in that epic shootout, 42-41 loss. Ohio State had a game-winning field goal attempt as time expired. Literally, as the clock was hitting midnight on New Year's Eve, Ohio State was trying to kick a field goal to win the game. If they make that field goal, they go on to play TCU in the championship game. And based on what we saw Georgia do to TCU, Ohio State and Ryan Day probably have a national championship under the belt, which completely flips the narrative of how everybody talks about Ohio State. The losses to Michigan would still hurt, but if they had a national championship under their belt already, it would feel a lot different. And it all came down to that one missed field goal. So again, same situation that they're in this year. They showed up. They got over the loss to Michigan, showed up fully prepared with a great game plan to go toe-to-toe with Georgia. And then 3 years ago against Utah in the Rose Bowl, after that first loss under Ryan Day to Michigan, biggest game in the history of Utah football, to be a former lower level D1 school, rising up to the Pac-12, finally winning the conference, going to the Rose Bowl. Biggest moment in program history by far. Ohio State had a ton of opt-outs. That was the year that Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson went in the first round. They both opted out of the game. And then Jackson Smith and Jigba rises up with 347 yards. CJ Stroud throws the ball all over the field. And they end up ruining what was supposed to be just a huge celebration in the Rose Bowl for Utah with, a bunch of backups on the field. Ohio State ends up taking them down. Again, each of these years, I think you can say Ohio State didn't show up with a lack of focus after that loss to Michigan, even in the years where they weren't in the playoff. So I'm not concerned about that. If you think Tennessee is going to win this game because of matchups and whatnot, go ahead and pick Tennessee. I think the matchups favor Ohio State, and I'm not worried about the focus. So I'm going to pick Ohio State to win this first round game and move on to rematch with Oregon.
Moving on to take on Oregon in a rematch of a game that was just ridiculous at the end. We saw some real outstanding coaching from landing of the Oregon Ducks there in that ending of the game against Ohio State. For anybody who doesn't remember, stuck the extra defender on the field, got the 5-yard penalty, but forced time to run off the clock with that play call, prevented Ohio State from getting within range where they could pull off the win, and had to really just have a final play that wasn't going to get the job done for them. So Ohio State will advance here in Ryan's bracket and take on Oregon in the rematch. All right, let's switch gears. We'll go over to the right side of the bracket. Now, keep in mind, this game, Ohio State, Tennessee, Saturday. I know if you guys are like me, you like to know what's on the forecast here from a scheduling perspective. Saturday is going to be an outstanding day of football because we've got all three of these first round games. We're going to talk about the next one, Penn State at SMU. That game will kick off at noon on Saturday. Then we have at 4 p.m. Clemson, Texas, and then we have at 8 p.m. Tennessee, Ohio State. So 3 of these 4 first-round games are going to be held on Saturday. And in addition, we also have at 1 p.m. on Saturday, Houston is taking on Kansas City for the NFL, and we also have Pittsburgh taking on Baltimore at 4:30. So we've got 2 big NFL games, playoff teams facing one another, coupled with the college football playoff game on Saturday. So a big game of college football. Not a day where we're going to have a ton of overlapping bowl games or something like that. They've restricted that day to pretty much almost exclusively, with the exception of a couple of I think it's FCS playoff games where we're going to see Montana State, North Dakota State, South Dakota State. Those should be fun to watch as well. But we will be seeing these games. So let's go to the first game of the day, Ryan, on Saturday, and that is SMU taking on Penn State. SMU, obviously the number 11 seed, going on the road off of a loss, taking on the Nittany Lions of Penn State. Number 6, we know the story about their backup quarterback going into the transfer portal here. He was utilized in some short yardage. Do you think that impacts Penn State's ability to take on and beat SMU? Who do you have winning this game, and how do you view this matchup going?
Yeah, backup quarterback Bo Prabula going into the transfer portal and not playing in this matchup is really interesting. It probably doesn't have a huge impact on the game. They did have some packages for him because he's a running quarterback, and that's a part of Andy Cole and Nicky's offense. But just not having that backup there as insurance is certainly odd that this played out that way, because on the other side of the field, SMU's backup Preston Stone is also in the transfer portal, and he will be there on Saturday. Ohio State's backup quarterback will also be there on Saturday for the Buckeyes. So it's not something that had to happen. It did not have to play out this way. I certainly would like to know a little bit more about what went on leading to that decision, and whether it was Prabula or James Franklin forced his hand a little bit, which wouldn't shock me either. But as for this matchup, this was a hard one for me to pick, because if this game were on a neutral field, I'm taking SMU. I think they're one of these spread offense teams, which we've talked about on the show at different points this year, that have given Penn State a lot of trouble, especially teams that can run the ball from spread formations. That's been Penn State's kryptonite this season, and that's SMU's bread and butter. But this is a team from Dallas going up to State College in late December. It's supposed to be 25 degrees with a chance of snow. I have some doubts about their ability to be prepared for that moment, especially after in that Clemson game, in the ACC championship game. Weather wasn't really a factor in that game, but they definitely came out looking a little bit, like a deer in headlights in the first half of that game. And they regrouped and very nearly ended up winning that game, but they started very slow. And I wonder how they're going to do against Penn State in a tough road environment this time. Obviously, that was a neutral field in the ACC championship. Now they're in a road environment, really tough weather conditions that they're not used to. When on the flip side, you have obviously Penn State, they play and practice in cold weather. And, their starting quarterback, Drew Aller, grew up in the snow belt of Northeast Ohio, not far from where I grew up. He's certainly used to playing in the snow and in the cold. So they've got a lot of players on the Penn State sideline who will not be fazed by the element, where you have SMU playing in this road environment in difficult conditions because of the weather. I think it could lead to them starting slowly. And, this is also not a disciplined football team to begin with. So I think the elements and the tough road environment could affect them even more than some other teams. They rank 107th in turnovers lost this season. They rank 131st in penalty yards. So I think a team that struggles in those areas, they're more susceptible to being tripped up by bad weather or tough road environment. And in this game, you've got both of those working against them. So even though purely from an X's and O's standpoint, I could definitely make a case for SMU, I don't think this is a really good spot for them given the environment that they're going to be thrown into. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's a close game, especially if it plays out a little bit like the ACC championship game did, where maybe they start slow and then sort of figure it out. I wouldn't be surprised if it's close, but I'm going to pick Penn State to ultimately win with home field advantage and move on.
All right, so I'm looking up the live forecast right now, Ryan, for Saturday at noon p.m. Let me pull this up here because I'm trying to get the feels like temperature. But what I am seeing right now is it is going to be 26 degrees at kickoff at noon on Saturday. 11-mile-per-hour winds, gusts of 24 miles per hour. I don't have the feels like temperature right now. It's too far into the future for this app that I'm using, but that looks like it's probably going to be wind chill. I wouldn't be surprised if this is down at like the 19 to 20 degree in terms of the real feel temperature. So definitely something that Ryan is paying close attention to as it relates to SMU going on the road and playing with that high-powered, high-flying offense against a physical team like Penn State, who's used to the elements. Okay, so Penn State advances to take on Boise State, which, keep in mind now, instead of that game being in Boise for the second round games, that game is going to be at a neutral site at a bowl situation. Okay, last but not least, to conclude the first round games and get our Elite Eight, as it were, we've got Indiana taking on Notre Dame. This game is the only game of these four first round games that will be played on Friday night. It is Friday night at 8 p.m. in Notre Dame, obviously. Very close rivalry from a proximity perspective between these two schools, Indiana and Notre Dame. At the current market, Notre Dame is favored by 7 points. Total sits at 51. We'll talk more about the ATS perspective and component of this game in a few days on Friday. Friday show at noon Eastern, which will predict that game Friday evening. But from an outright perspective, which of these two teams do you have advancing to take on Georgia and why?
Yeah, this is another one that's kind of tough to predict because I think it's fair to question the resume of both of these teams. We haven't seen either team really play in many big games. I guess Notre Dame has that season opening win against Texas A&M, but A&M became a much better team as the season went on. So do either of these teams have enough proof that they even belong in the playoff? I think you could question it. Just based on comparing one lost team to some of the three lost teams, it makes sense that they got in. But are these really top 12 teams? I don't know. Maybe, but I don't know. You could make an argument that maybe neither one of these teams are. So that raises some doubts for me in this game. I definitely have less confidence in this than some others just because I don't know how these teams are going to fare on a big stage because they haven't really been on it. Or at least in Notre Dame's case, they haven't been on it. And in Indiana's case, they haven't looked good when they were on the big stage, most notably against Ohio State. And to an extent in that Michigan also, they ended up beating Michigan. Michigan obviously has no offense this year, so they were able to pull off the win. But Indiana's offense was slowed dramatically by Michigan's defense. And then the same thing happened the following week against Ohio State. So I have doubts as to how they're going to do against this Notre Dame defense, which statistically compares pretty favorably to Ohio State and Michigan. Now, like I said, they haven't really played anybody. So you could question whether those stats are lying to us. It's possible. I'm going to say I think the stats are real. I think Notre Dame is legit and they legitimately belong here and are a threat in this playoff system. But that is a doubt that should be in the back of our minds because Curtis O'Rourke might be the best quarterback they've faced all year. I think to this point, the best quarterback to go up against this Notre Dame defense was probably Tyler Shuck of Louisville. He threw for 264 yards and 3 touchdowns. Notre Dame won that game relatively easily. The final score, they only won by 7 points. 3 Louisville turnovers played a big factor in that game. Louisville kind of choked in that first quarter of that game and spotted Notre Dame a big lead. They also played Jaden Mayava, maybe the second best quarterback at USC that they've played this year. He threw for 360 yards and 3 touchdowns. That game was tied at halftime. Notre Dame ended up pulling away late in the second half to make it seem like a relatively easy victory. But that game was in doubt for a period of time, in part because Mayava was able to throw the ball on them. So if Curtis Rourke and Indiana's passing attack is the best that Notre Dame has faced, it wouldn't shock me if they pulled an upset here, because maybe Notre Dame's defense isn't actually as good as Ohio State's and Michigan. And when they go up against a good offense in Indiana, maybe we see them come back down to earth a little bit. So I could, construct an argument both ways that neither one of these teams is actually as good as we think they are, based on the fact that they haven't played anybody or haven't looked good against the good teams that they have played. So I have doubts about both teams. With the fact that it's at home, with the fact that Notre Dame has looked very good on defense, I'm inclined to believe that their defensive performance is a little more legit than what we've seen from Indiana on offense at times. So possibly a low-scoring game, but I like Notre Dame to ultimately pull off the victory and move on to face Georgia.
This game is one of the ones I'm most looking forward to. All of these games are going to be fascinating. I love the fact that we finally are at this stage where we've got the playoffs. I'm sure that you guys do as well. But this game in particular, due to the proximity, I also think I know a couple of guys that are going to this game on Friday night and then heading down to Columbus, Ohio to watch Ohio State, Tennessee on Saturday. So that's going to make for a fun road trip for a couple buddies of mine. But I do want to mention, we had a comment here. Feel free, by the way, guys, jump into the chat over on the YouTube of Sharp Football Analysis, and you can contribute comments there. Eugene asked the question, will you rerun the NFL playoff competition from last year? I won it last year, and I will win it again this year. Bold words from Eugene. Yes, Eugene, we will. We had hundreds of people in the NFL playoff pick'em last year, picking all of the games. Best record through the Super Bowl gets prizes. And the reason that we did this last year, just so you guys know, is one of the first things that I ever did that got me kind of a little bit of, it didn't really get me notoriety because this was more anonymous, but it really felt like I could then make a career out of this or do this more professionally. Was, I don't know, it had to be 15 years ago, maybe back in like the 2008-9 timeframe. I entered back at covers.com. I entered a NFL playoff pick'em. You pick total or spread for all of the NFL playoff games. And heading into the Super Bowl, I was undefeated. I was like 14-0, 13-0, something like that. And I could lock up the victory for the whole thing if I made sure I picked what the second place guy picked, because there was thousands of people in there. You say like, well, if you're 14-0, how are you not like for sure the winner? Because there's thousands of people in this contest. At any rate, I ended up locking in the victory beforehand. I ended up going, I want to say 15-1 was the final record that I had. And I think I won like $600 cash. Wasn't a big prize at that point. But the bottom line was, it made me feel, hey, this may be something I should start focusing a little bit more on, because I can maybe have a little bit of success with this. And my computer model was doing really well at picking NFL totals. So at any rate, that's sort of how I got into this game. So we started doing this last year, and apparently Eugene won. We will do this again this year. We will have an NFL playoff challenge, but what we also will have is a college football playoff challenge as well. So I got some details on that right here. It's a $4,000 college football playoff pick'em challenge for any postseason subscriber. So if you get involved for the NFL and college postseason, or you get involved with just the college postseason, you will get automatically entered to this for free, where you can go and make your picks just like Ryan is doing here. You'll do it's pick them all the way through to the championship games, and we're going to be giving away $4,000 in cash and prizes to various different phases of winners there. So we're going to be doing a giveaway for college football playoff, but we also haven't announced it. We will be giving away for the NFL playoff as well. So might as well just get you some information on this. The bowl packages are now live. The postseason packages are now live up at Sharp Football. We're giving away a $100 early bird discount, but it will end tonight. use the coupon code SHOW50. It's there at the top left of the screen. It's there at the bottom of the screen, SHOW50, and you will get into the NFL postseason and college postseason. The last 3 years are College Bowl record. 35 wins and 8 losses. That's 81%. We went 9-0 last year. Might crank up the volume a little bit this year, so I'm certainly not expecting to go 9-0 again this year. Perfect record, but we will have more plays, but some of them will be smaller, and then we'll step out bigger on some of the plays that we're a little bit more confident in. Our NFL postseason is right around the corner as well. Lifetime, we are 170 wins, 103 losses. That's a 62% record. And we are 73% lifetime in the Super Bowl, 27 wins and 10 losses on our sides, totals, and teasers that we utilize there. So if you guys want involved in all of our postseason, the time to get on board is now, because the early bird ends tonight. Use coupon code SHOW50, get you a total of $100 off what the prices will revert to after today. And in addition, you'll be automatically entered. If you choose to participate, you don't have to, in our the college football playoff pick'em, where we're giving away $4,000 in prizes. And we're also going to be doing one for the NFL. We haven't determined the exact structure or the prize amounts on that, but we'll be doing one for the NFL as well. Okay, now we're into the quarterfinal games. And we've got, let's see, where are we going to start here with the quarterfinals? All right, let's go down to the lower left quadrant. That was the orange bracket in the first round there. We're going to be talking about Texas taking on Arizona State, a 4-5 matchup. Let me just pull this up here. This game is the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. Obviously, that's held in Atlanta, Georgia. That is going to be on January 1st, New Year's Day at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. Arizona State gets this rest this week and watch Texas beat Clemson, and then they get to host the Longhorns. Ryan, who do you think has the matchup edge here in this game? We saw Scadaboo run wild in the first round game. In their last game of the season. What do you anticipate happening here where the Longhorns take on Arizona State?
Yeah, I think when this bracket was revealed, Arizona State was crushed to see Texas as their likely matchup in the quarterfinals. This is just a terrible matchup for Arizona State. If Clemson were to upset Texas, I would like Arizona State's chances. They would have a good shot in that matchup, but this is just a brutal matchup for them against a team that really excels in dominating on defense and against the run. Arizona State needs to kind of make this game a little bit more of a shootout in order to have a chance and try to challenge Texas and Quinn Ewers to keep up with them. I don't see any way they're going to be able to do that with Cam Scadaboo. Texas knows that they want to run the ball at a really high rate. They're going to load up and stack the box and be able to shut him down. And I don't think that there's any way Arizona State is able to pivot to a more pass-heavy attack because they've lost their top receiver, Jordan Tyson, for the year. They lost him in the regular season finale. Obviously, it didn't matter in the Big 12 championship game, but the Texas defense is a different beast. Arizona State has not faced anything like this yet. If they're a one-dimensional team going up against Texas, I don't think they have any chance. This game could get really ugly if Texas's offense is able to get going. It's tough luck for Arizona State because really any other team in the field, I would say they have a little bit of a chance, but I think Texas defense is just too suffocating, especially when they're not going to be able to have much of a passing attack. So I think Texas just runs away with this one and cruises into the semis.
Yeah, Ryan, talk to me for a second there about the logic of Iowa State in that last game with the way that they were playing defense and just not loading the box. You're anticipating Texas is not going to be a total moron and not load the box, but that's exactly what we saw last week from Iowa State. What was the thought process there? How do you not know ahead of time that this is going to be coming down the pike? How do you not make adjustments in game? What's your reaction to that? Why you think Texas is not going to fall into that trap?
Yeah, that's sort of been the MO for Iowa State under Matt Campbell. They are going to play their style of football no matter what, even if it costs them a football game. You know, it really burned them, I think, on the offensive side a few years ago, back when, remember, at one point in time, they had Brock Purdy and Breece Hall on the same team. They had Xavier Hutchinson, who's now in the league, Charlie Kohler, who's now in the league. Tons of talent on the offensive side of football. That team went 7-6 because Matt Campbell on offense, he likes to play slow, bleed the clock, run the ball type of offense. And when he was loaded with offensive talent, he refused to adjust. And when you play that style of football, it's a great way to pull off upsets. But if you're the team with more talent, it's a great way to let other teams upset you. So I think it was sort of the same thing on the defensive side of the ball. They like to play 3-3-5 defense. That's what they're going to do. They're going to play with more light boxes typically. And it doesn't matter if you're going to run the ball down their throat. They're just going to play their style of football. That's how Matt Campbell coaches, and it has led to some really bad outcomes for him over the years. Obviously, he's the greatest coach in Iowa State history. The overall body of work you can't argue with, but there are times when his stubbornness gets in the way.
It certainly did. So I guess for you guys watching this show, you may not want to take too much from that massive 45-19 win Arizona State over Iowa State. That was Iowa State playing with light boxes the entire course of the game, not making any adjustments because that's who they are. Texas, not that type of defense from the get-go, from the outset of games, from the general strategy of which they approach opponents, but certainly from an adjustment perspective, certainly from a matchup-based perspective where they're trying to come up with a game plan. They're going to see exactly what Arizona State is going to be looking to do and make those adjustments ahead of time. Part of the reason why Ryan likes Texas to advance to the semifinals. Okay, so now we're going to go right above Texas there. We're going to be looking at the 1-8 matchup between Ohio State and Oregon. This game is at 5 p.m. on January 1st. So the first game of the day would be the Texas-Arizona State game. The second game of the day will be at the Rose Bowl, familiar territory for Oregon. They will be hosting Ohio State. Ryan, these two teams have met in a bowl. I'm almost positive that these two teams played in the Rose Bowl one year, but maybe I'm misremembering and that's some other team. But this is going to be an epic game as well, the rematch. Walk us through how you think these two teams will do in a battle for a rematch against one another, and who do you ultimately see coming out as the victor?
Yeah, these teams definitely played in the Rose Bowl at least once that I can remember. I believe it was when Terrell Pryor was still a quarterback at Ohio State. Ohio State ended up winning that game, I believe, about 15 years ago or so. But yeah, it's also a rematch from a great game earlier this season, probably the best college football game of the regular season. Between what at that point in time looked like probably the two best teams in the country. This game, I think whoever wins becomes the favorite to win it all. And I would say that even if Tennessee upsets Ohio State, like I said at the beginning, if Tennessee were to somehow pull off upsets against these two teams, suddenly you got to take those two wins into consideration and probably make them the favorite. So this is the battle to see who is the favorite in the quarterfinals. I'm going to side with Oregon. I think they're able to repeat their performance from the first matchup between these two teams. Even though that game was such a toss-up game, it could have gone either way. Ohio State obviously was driving, like you already mentioned, and Oregon got that, that penalty by putting a 12th man on the field, and then Will Howard, stupidly ran the ball and just ended up bleeding the clock by accident, basically. But they were driving with a chance to win that game. That game could have gone either way. One thing that's changed since that is Ohio State, they lost their left tackle, Josh Simmons, in that Oregon game. They have since lost their center, Seth McLaughlin. Their offensive line is not as strong as it was at one point in time. On the flip side, Oregon in that game against Ohio State was without probably their best defensive lineman, Jordan Birch. He is now healthy. So Oregon has been getting healthier, Ohio State less healthy. And that has been happening at the same spot where they're going head to head in the trenches when Ohio State is on offense. So I think that is one particular area of this game where the advantage has flipped to pretty clearly being in Oregon's favor. And that is probably the biggest advantage either team has. If you were just to go like matchup by matchup throughout, the different areas of the game, that's probably the one spot where either team has the biggest advantage is Oregon's defensive line against Ohio State's offensive line. I think that's probably enough to sway me towards picking Oregon in this game. Should be a great game. I will absolutely not be shocked if Ohio State wins this. This could be the game of the playoffs with the winner then becoming the favorite.
I don't want to tip anything, Ryan, but I'm curious. We'll come back to it. You mentioned how important this game is and how big this game is for Oregon, how close it potentially could be. I wonder if it's going to be one of Oregon's toughest tests of the playoffs here. So we've got the Oregon defensive line matching up really well against a weakened Ohio State offensive line, potentially tipping the scales there in that game. Now we're going to head over to where are we at here? The Vrbo Fiesta Bowl, and we're going to be looking at Penn State taking on Boise State, the Battle of the States here. This game is on New Year's Eve. This is the lone game on New Year's Eve, December 31st at 7:30 p.m. So we've got one game on New Year's Eve, and then the other three are going to be on January 1st. We're going to be talking about Boise State matching up with Penn State. Ryan, how do you see this game going? We obviously know that Boise State has a great running back, Heisman finalist, but they're now taking on potentially their toughest challenge of the entire year, most likely, in a well-rounded Penn State team, physical, and potentially can stand up to Boise State. How do you envision this game going?
Yeah, my picks have been all chalk so far, but here I'm going to go with an upset, at least in terms of the betting line, not an upset based on seeding, but I believe Penn State would be favored in this game. I'm going to pick Boise State to pull off the small upset. Penn State has a pretty solid run defense if you just look at the raw numbers, but teams that really run the ball well have been able to give them problems. I've mentioned on the show a few times about teams that are able to spread the ball out, give them the most problems. That's not Boise State. They're a physical running team with Ashton Genty, obviously. But Penn State has also struggled with those teams at times when that's like really the core identity of the team. The Minnesota game is really the best example of that. Minnesota gave them a tough game. They didn't put up huge numbers on the ground, but they ran the ball well enough with their physical, bleed the clock, run defense, run offense, that they were able to control time of possession that game, limit the number of possessions for Penn State, and gave Penn State a little bit of a scare late in the season there. And Boise State is basically a better, much better version of that. They're going to lean on Ashton Genty all game long. You know what's coming, and they're just betting that you can't stop it. And so far, really nobody has been able to, other than Oregon in what was a really close game. So I have concerns about Penn State's ability to contain Genty. Penn State ranks 76th in broken missed tackle rate against the run. That's not good when you're going up against Ashton Genty in a playoff game, especially on a neutral field. I think Boise State will be able to play a little bit faster than they're sometimes able to in some of the cold weather games that they've had. Like UNLV in that Mountain West Championship game. UNLV's run defense overall on a play-to-play basis did a pretty good job, and I think the weather was probably a factor in that as well, with it being so cold up there. There was that one long run that Genty had, obviously, which broke the game open. But generally, on a play-to-play basis, they shut out Boise State in the second half of that game. But that's a great UNLV run defense too. Penn State is not on that level of being able to be physical and contain the run. Like I mentioned, 76th in broken missed tackle rate. That's a big red flag when you're going up against the most physical runner in college football, probably the most physical runner we've seen in college football since Derrick Henry. So I think this is a bad matchup for Penn State, and Boise State pulls off not a seeding upset, but probably an upset on the betting line and moves on to the quarterfinals.
Yeah, I don't even think you have to use the word probably. There is no doubt, in my opinion, that Penn State will be favored in this game. So you've got your first upset there of Boise State knocking off Penn State. What do you think about, by the way, Boise State getting that 3 seed? Obviously, with you show them getting to the semifinals, you believe that they are worthy of having that 3 seed. Was that was by default, like the committee had no other place to put Boise State than the 3 seed?
Yeah, I mean, you could make an argument that Boise and Arizona State should be flipped. I like having Boise State as the 3 seed, though, as the third highest ranked conference champion. I think you've got to factor in that game against Oregon to boost their resume. Even though it was a loss, they went toe-to-toe with Oregon and proved they belonged on the field with the best team in the country, the undisputed best team of the regular season. Boise State shared a field with them and looked like they absolutely belong. So even though it's hard to give credit to a team for a loss usually, since Boise State ran the table in all their other games and was neck and neck with the best team in the country, I think that matters a lot. And so I think they were worthy of that 3 seed.
So you've got, by seedings, you've got Texas as an underdog upsetting Arizona State, but probably Texas would be favored in that neutral site game. And here you've got Boise by seedings being the superior team over Penn State, but Penn State will probably be the betting favorite there. So whether you're looking at seedings or spreads, you got probably one upset here in this quarterfinal round. Let's see if you've got another one. We've got Georgia taking on Notre Dame. This game will be held at the Allstate Sugar Bowl. Keep in mind, guys, if you do have questions for Ryan about any of these potential matchups as he's talking through these games, head on over to YouTube, Sharp Football Analysis, search for us there. You can get your questions in, and Ryan will be happy to answer them. But we've got Georgia taking on Notre Dame in the neutral site Sugar Bowl game. This will be the last game of the day on January 1st, 8:45 p.m. kickoff. Who do you anticipate taking over this game, Ryan? This is obviously a game Georgia quite familiar with playing in the Sugar Bowl.
Yeah, I went back and forth on this one because I think the teams match up pretty well, but there were really two reasons that led me to pick Georgia to win this game. The first is Kirby Smart has a month to prepare for this game. Marcus Freeman's going to have about 10 days or so. Kirby Smart, with Nick Saban no longer there, probably the best coach in the country right now. I don't think anyone would argue with that statement too much. And he's got a month to prepare. Marcus Freeman not only does have a shorter amount of time to prepare for this game, but Notre Dame has not been good in big games at any point in time in Freeman's tenure there. So there are serious doubts about his ability to get his team prepared for this game. Whereas Kirby Smart with a month to prepare, I mean, that's almost an unfair advantage. So even though schematically, I think these teams are pretty similar, especially if Carson Beck can't play and maybe the Georgia isn't able to throw the ball as often as they would with Beck in there. These teams are very similar. You could certainly make an argument for Notre Dame just by looking at the matchups and strengths and weaknesses and whatnot. But that's a really big factor. The coaching difference is a big one in this one. And then the other thing is the one area where the teams do differ is the passing attack. Notre Dame has no downfield passing attack, essentially. Riley Leonard is not a downfield passer at all. He's a good college quarterback because he can run the ball. But if they get into it, if at some point they need to throw the ball to win the game, I don't trust Riley Leonard. They rank 106th in explosive pass rate on offense. Georgia, even though everyone's been disappointed in Carson Beck's performance this year, they still have enough NFL talent all over the field that they rank 39th in explosive pass rate. So, yeah, Beck hasn't been great this year. That's definitely one of the reasons why Georgia is not entering this tournament as a heavy favorite like they may have in years past, because Beck has been such a flawed quarterback for them. But whether it's Beck or Stockton at quarterback, I think there are enough playmakers for Georgia that they're able to make one or two big plays down the field. And I question whether Notre Dame will be able to do any of that against the Georgia defense. So the Kirby Smart advantage, the fact that Georgia's a little bit better in the passing game, I think they're able to make a few plays here and there and win what's probably a close game and advance on to face Boise State.
Okay, so we're advancing them, and now we've got the Final Four set. We're familiar with this from a NCAA basketball perspective. The Final Four for Ryan's college football playoff bracket. We've got Oregon taking on Texas. That game will be played in the Goodyear Cotton Bowl, which is on January 10th. But the first game of the semifinals will be this Georgia-Boise game, and that will be played in the Capital One Orange Bowl on January 9th, the day before. So we're going to stick here on the right side of the bracket and talk about this Georgia versus Boise State game. Part of the reason, Ryan, that you liked Boise to be able to pull off the upset over Penn State was that Penn State has a poor broken tackle rate, number 76 in the country, and they struggled with physical runners in the past. I don't know that that'll be the case with Georgia in this one. So talk to us a little bit about how you see Georgia being able to control Ashton Jeanty here. And you didn't necessarily like Notre Dame's quarterback's ability to Riley Leonard push the ball down the field if they need to come back in a game ranking 106th in explosive pass rate. Do you think if Boise gets down in this one, if their run game isn't able to have as much success as they were early on in the Penn State game against Georgia here, and they have to turn to the pass, could their pass game get them back into this one?
Yeah, I think Boise State is going to have to run the ball well, bleed the clock, make this a low-scoring game to have a chance, which is plausible because Georgia's run defense has been vulnerable at times this year. But when it's been vulnerable, it's mostly been due to injuries. They've had a variety of injuries throughout the year. They've gotten some of those guys back. And with a month to go before this game, I think the defense is probably going to be pretty fresh and healthy. So that's one of the really big advantages Georgia got by winning the SEC championship and being able to get that bye, is that they can probably go in to these games being pretty healthy, which they haven't really been at any point this year. Had the full deck stacked for them on defense in terms of all their best playmakers. This might be the healthiest we've seen Georgia all year when they take the field in that quarterfinal game. So I do like Georgia in this matchup to knock off Boise State and advance to the semis. And I want to heap praise on Kirby Smart a little bit more in this matchup because I think it's a big factor, especially going up against another team with a coaching staff that is not nearly as experienced as he is. I think it gives Georgia a huge advantage. Earlier this year, when we were previewing the first of the Texas Georgia game. Georgia had that ugly win against Kentucky that they barely snuck out with a win. They lost to Alabama. Then they had that ugly win against Mississippi State, the worst team in the SEC, that was somehow moving the ball against them and making it a competitive game in the second half. It looked like maybe Georgia didn't have a playoff team right then because they were going into that Texas game looking like they were probably going to take their second loss. They had some ugly wins on a resume. Did not look good. And I said, if Kirby Smart is going to establish himself as the new Nick Saban in this sport, he was going to find a way to get Georgia to the playoff, despite the way that they looked in the first half of the season. Because we saw Saban do that a number of times, as recently as just last season. Remember, they lost to Texas, and then the next week came out and were nearly upset by South Florida. And it looked like Alabama was done. Like they looked like they were dead and buried and not going to the 14 playoff. And yet somehow Alabama wins the SEC and sneaks in. Controversially sneaked into the playoff, but they won the SEC in a year where it looked like through the first month or so of the season that they had no shot at getting that far. Saban found a way to pull it off. And there were a few other seasons throughout his career there where it looked like they were probably not the best team in the SEC, and yet he ended up winning the national championship in some of those seasons. That's exactly what Kirby Smart has done this year. Through about 5 or 6 games into the season, Georgia did not look anything close to a national championship caliber contender. They didn't even look like they were going to win the SEC, and yet here they are. They're the SEC champs once again, and in a great spot here to run through some much more inexperienced teams and coaching staffs in the playoffs. I think that likely against Notre Dame, or even if it is against Indiana, that's an inexperienced coaching staff in big games as well. And then against either Boise State or Penn State, again, 2 other teams that have never been anywhere close to this stage before. It's a huge advantage for Kirby Smart, given all the experience that he has throughout the season. I think his team is just dramatically more prepared for these games he's had at Georgia. I think they advance to the championship game.
All right, so we've got Georgia advancing to the championship game. And by the way, guys, some sites out there have the hypothetical lines. I do want to talk about these hypothetical lines momentarily once we get the final matchup announced in a second from Ryan. I'm going to double back and talk about some of these hypothetical lines for each of these games moving through here and why this could be important for you to take notes on these hypothetical lines. But let's go back and set the bracket for the national championship game. We're all familiar with Georgia. Are we going to be getting Texas in here? Or is it going to be Oregon in a battle of 2 teams that, you mentioned before? We've got Oregon's defensive line having that edge over the offensive line of Ohio State, primarily due to injuries that Ohio State suffered. You think that's going to be a very close game in that quarterfinal matchup, but because of those injuries, it's going to give Oregon the upper hand. Do they match up better against Texas, or do you think this game is going to be even tighter?
I think this should actually be a little bit easier of a game for Oregon once they get past Ohio State, because Texas is just not as well balanced overall. I think Texas has the best defense in the country, but the second best defense in the country is probably Ohio State. And we've already seen Oregon put up good offensive numbers against Ohio State earlier in the season. And I don't think it was because Ohio State played a poor game. I think it was Auburn and their ability to just excel basically in every phase of the game on offense. They can run the ball well. They can be explosive. They can pound the ball between the tackles. Obviously, the short passing game is really their bread and butter on offense, but Dylan Gabriel also attacks downfield well. They're just so balanced that even though Texas is a great defense, definitely a championship caliber defense, it wouldn't shock me if they ran the table and won this with just a stellar defensive performance all the way through. But I got to side with Oregon because of how balanced they are. I think they're going to be able to do enough on offense to put some points on the board. And then on the other side, we've seen how inconsistent Texas's offense has been. If it all clicks and Quinn Ewers plays his best game, yeah, he could win a shootout. But we haven't really seen him do that this season. He really misses the weapons that he had last year at Texas, and it just hasn't really all come together. So in this game against an Oregon team that really just excels in all phases of the game, I don't think Texas is going to be able to keep up if Oregon puts a decent number on the board.
Okay, so we've got Oregon advancing in your bracket, and it's number 1 versus number 2. It's chalk at the top here for us into the championship round, and Ryan thinks that the game versus Texas will be even easier. I want to double back, even easier than it was against Ohio State. I want to double back to talk a little bit about some of the hypothetical matchups here that Ryan has so that we can talk about point spreads and why this could be important. So let's start at the bottom right-hand quadrant. If Penn State takes on Boise State, the projected line right now, you can bet this if you want to, is Penn State minus 11.5. So that's a massive favorite for Penn State. Keep in mind, these are all neutral site fields, and these are all lined at FanDuel. So I'm going to share with you the betting lines for these hypothetical games. And so even if you're not going to bet this, my advice would be to write this down and then compare it to what the real line ends up being to see if there's any potential edge. A lot of people watch a game and then think that, oh, well, because this team won in such a large fashion that they should be favored by more points in the next game. And the reality is sometimes those scores are inflated by luck factors or turnovers, things of that nature. Right now, Penn State would be favored by 11.5 points in that game. Let's look at the bottom left-hand quadrant, Arizona State versus Texas. Texas minus 13.5. So a massive favorite for Texas over Arizona State in that matchup. Let's go to, and were it to be Clemson, Clemson also would have been favored over Arizona State. So even though Clemson is the 12 seed, Clemson, according to these lines, if they were somehow to upset Texas, be 4.5 point favorites over Arizona State. Okay, let's move to the upper left. We've got Oregon taking on Ohio State. That game, Ryan is correct, a very close nail biter. Oregon would be favored right now by 1.5 points over Ohio State. So you can lay 1.5 with Oregon at reduced juice at FanDuel if you want to get an early bet there. Ryan thinks that Oregon wins that game, but that game would be tighter. Oregon would be favored by 4.5 points if Tennessee were to have advanced. And then we go to the top right quadrant, and we've got, what are we looking at here? Indiana taking on Georgia. And in that game, Georgia would be favored by 6.5 points. It's Notre Dame. Notre Dame taking on Georgia. Notre Dame is actually the betting favorite in that game, Ryan. I'm not sure if you know that, but at least according to FanDuel, Notre Dame would be favored over Georgia by 1.5 points. So you actually have one. You got, let's see, do we have Boise State and Penn State? Yeah, you do. So you've got 2 upsets in the quarterfinals. You've got Notre Dame right now would be favored over Georgia, even though the seeds are different. You've got Georgia advancing. Boise State is 11.5 point underdogs against Penn State. You've got Boise State advancing. You've got Ohio State losing as 1.5 point dogs to Oregon. So they're a small underdog. And then Texas is a very large favorite over Arizona State, and you've got them advancing. I do not have any hypothetical lines for the semifinal games right now. We do have some odds, though, from a futures perspective as to teams to advance to the finals, teams to make the title game. So right now you've got Oregon and you've got Georgia. I'm looking up these on the fly. We've got Oregon to reach the championship game. Yes is plus 190. Yes is plus 190 at DraftKings. And you've got Georgia to reach the championship game is plus 150. Georgia to reach the championship game is plus 150. I want to see what is Notre Dame to reach the championship game. Notre Dame is plus 400. So why that's interesting to me is the odds at FanDuel say that Notre Dame should be favored over Georgia slightly. and yet Georgia to reach the championship, and the next team that they would play would be Boise State for either of these teams, if what you're suggesting is correct. And yet Notre Dame is plus 400 to reach the championship, whereas Georgia is only plus 150 in shorter odds than even Oregon. So bottom line here is somebody's wrong about their numbers, and there's some value to be had there if you were so inclined. All right, let's talk about the championship, Ryan. We've got Oregon taking on Georgia. This game, let's see, on the schedule will be held January 20th. So 10 days from the semifinal game. We've got the championship January 20th at 7:30 p.m. Oregon taking on Georgia. Who do you have winning this game, Ryan? Why do you have them winning this game?
Yeah, I mean, what a great storyline it would be if we got this matchup. Dan Lanning was obviously hired off of Kirby Smart's staff, and then in his first game of his tenure at Oregon, played against Georgia, the defending national champs, like his former team, and just got absolutely smashed 49-3 to start off his Oregon tenure. For him to come back a few years later and play his old team, his old boss in the championship game would just be an incredible matchup, because obviously this should be a pretty good game. Oregon would be favored, and I'm going to go ahead and pick Oregon to win this game. I think, we've talked about the good matchups that Oregon would have earlier, having played likely Ohio State, likely Texas in those two games. If they do go through those two teams, Oregon is going to feel like, all the pressure's off at this point. Like they get to ease up a little bit and actually face an easier opponent in the championship game. Actually, it would be regardless of who plays in this game, whether it's Notre Dame, Penn State, Boise State, whoever it is, it's going to be easier once they get to the championship game. Whoever advances from that side of the bracket will not have as difficult of an opponent in the championship game as they did in the semifinals, more than likely. So I think Oregon would be in a great spot to win this game and possibly win it pretty easily. Looking a little bit closer in terms of how these two teams match up. Number one, the coaching matchup. I talked about it in both of Georgia's previous matchups, the huge advantage that Kirby Smart would have. Well, Lanning has a ton of experience. Obviously, he was on Kirby Smart's staff as a coordinator for some of those championship runs. He's been in those big games before. Obviously, they've played in a lot of big games at Boise State. Just this year, a big game against Ohio State that they won in pretty dramatic fashion, a tight finish there. He's proven that Lanning has proven that he is capable of being a great coach on the big stage. And that would, in the way this bracket is set up, this would be the first time that Kirby Smart really has to go up against a coach on the other sideline who is, on the same level as him in terms of those schematics and being able to prepare his team for these types of games. So that, I would say that matchup is kind of a push between the coaching staffs. But then when you look at how the teams match up on the field, I think it really starts to swing towards Oregon's favor in a big way. I've been pretty down on Georgia's defense all year, at least relative to what we expect from a Kirby Smart defense. Injuries have played a factor in that a little bit, and they should be healthier at this point, but they just don't have the depth. The portal has hurt them. They've lost some of that incredible depth that they had in some of those previous championship teams. And Oregon can just beat you in so many ways, especially considering how poised Dillon Gabriel has been as a passer this year. Obviously, one of the ways Georgia can really beat you, and we saw it in both of the Texas games, is with that pass rush. They can fluster. Even an experienced quarterback like Quinn Ewers, we've just never seen Dillon Gabriel flustered, even in big games like this. Ohio State has a good pass rush too, and they got pressure on him in that game. But Gabriel he wasn't sacked in that game. He always got the ball out quickly. That's just the type of passer that he is. He makes those tough decisions under pressure and really keeps the team on schedule. Even if he doesn't get a big play, he avoids the negative plays. And in a big game, that can easily be the difference between winning and losing. And then, after they've run through defenses like Ohio State's and likely Texas's to get to this point, like I said, this is going to feel like just an easier test. I think everything will come relatively easy to them in this game. And so that's why I'm picking the Ducks to run the table all the way through the season, finish with an undefeated record. Dan Lanning gets to knock off his old boss in the championship game and hoist the trophy.
All right, so Oregon crowned the national champion at the conclusion of the first college football playoff bracket that we've got here. Here's what we got from the setup of this, Ryan, as we look back on the landscape here. You've got chalk in the first round, which is pretty normal when you're looking at trying to pick the March Madness and that type of thing. Most of the time, it's going to be chalk. In the second round games, there's 4 of them in the quarterfinals, and you've got 2 upsets. You've got a big upset in Boise over Penn State. Right now, they're catching 11.5 points. You think they're built well to match up and potentially upset Penn State. You've got Georgia right now. You can bet Georgia catching 1.5 points versus Notre Dame if you so choose. Georgia would be the underdog according to FanDuel. Go over to FanDuel if you like Georgia to win like Ryan does. You can get them plus 1.5 points. You got them upsetting Notre Dame. Over on the left-hand side of the bracket, you've got the chalk, even though that's a basic coin flip game, 1.5 points of Oregon over Ohio State. You've got Oregon going there, and the favorite Longhorns over Arizona State. They're massively favored in that game. And you think, let me ask you this question, Ryan. Do you think that game, Oregon versus Ohio State, you already indicated that you think that that's going to be a tougher game from a matchup perspective for Oregon than their semifinal game. Do you also agree that that would be a tougher game for them than their championship game were they to take on Georgia?
Yeah, I think Oregon's toughest test would be Ohio State. If Ohio State is able to get past Tennessee, which obviously Tennessee could pull off an upset. Tennessee has a really good defense and could win that game. But I think the winner of the Ohio State Oregon game then becomes the favorite to win the national championship. And that should be probably the best game of the playoffs in terms of the 2 best teams, just like it was in the regular season. Look at every game played in the regular season. The game where both teams looked great, fully lived up to expectations, gave us an awesome game. The only time that happened was Ohio State versus Oregon. Those were the 2 best teams in the country in the regular season. And I expect them to give us a great game. And very likely that game produces the national champion this year.
So let me ask you another hypothetical, and feel free to jump in the chat if you guys have some questions for Ryan as we're breaking down his bracket here. Let's say Carson Beck's injury precludes him from playing well or gets re-injured and he goes out. Let's say they're working with a lesser Carson Beck than you're currently expecting, or they have to work with their backup in this spot. Would you still think that Georgia has enough to advance past Notre Dame and Boise State and make it to the championship game? Or would that alter your projections and give you reasons to think one of these other 2 schools could make it there?
Yeah, I'm assuming Beck doesn't play. I don't think he's going to be ready based on how that injury looked and how they've been talking about it. Based on how these matchups play out, though, that doesn't concern me. Now, the bracket could have played out differently, and I could pick Oregon to get upset in the first round or in the quarterfinal, in their first game in the quarterfinals. That easily could have played out that way. But man, the coaching matters so much sometimes in these matchups. And how shocked would you be? Just look at the coaching matchups. Is Kirby Smart going to lose a game to Marcus Freeman or Kurt Cignetti or to who's on the other side, James Franklin or Spencer Danielson? I mean, that would be a stunning upset just look at the coaching upsets. I mean, that someone like Kirby Smart doesn't typically lose those types of games on big stages to wildly inexperienced coaches at that stage. Obviously, some of these coaches like Franklin have been doing it for a long time. Franklin's never played in a game like that, never won a game like this, only played in a couple big games. And, it famously has a terrible record against top 10 teams. I think it was 3-20, including that Oregon game against top 10 teams. And he hasn't won one since 2016. I mean, for any of these coaches to knock off Kirby Smart would be a huge shock, even when Kirby Smart is not playing with the best roster that he has throughout his tenure at Georgia. I mean, I think Georgia has had probably 3 or 4 teams at least better than this one. But man, the bracket played out perfectly for Kirby Smart to prepare his team, to have a month to get ready for these games, to build a game plan for each one of them. I don't think it matters if Beck doesn't play because they're good in too many other phases of the game. And Kirby Smart has proven time and again that he is able to make adjustments to mask some of their flaws. And if Stockton is a significant downgrade, Smart's going to have a game plan for that, and he's going to have his team ready to beat all of these teams would be a lesser opponent. I don't think Kirby Smart is going to lose one of those games.
So let me then ask you this. You're big on Kirby Smart here and the matchup of him versus some of these other coaches, obviously from a game adjustment standpoint in game, but more so from a game planning and a strategy before the game kicks off as to how to optimize your odds of winning a game based upon the way that you're planning out how to attack your opponent on the offensive and the defensive side of the football. How much of this, from a playoff perspective here, as you're picking the games and the winners of these games, do you think coaching is a factor? Do you think that this run and your confidence in who you're going to advance in these games as we get to the championships, does coaching weigh in more here in your thought process than you think it might for other people that are picking these games, because you just value those coaches' abilities to come up with those game plans in short time versus teams that they're, everybody knows the schedule for your own, division games, your own conference games. It's announced well in advance. You have weeks and months over the off season to start thinking about some of these opponents that you're going to be going up against. And then, of course, maybe you'll get to play a team in your conference title game, which is a team you're pretty familiar with. And then you'll go to take on a bowl game. I'm talking about a typical college season, and you have weeks to prepare for them. Here is a little bit of a more unique challenge. You've got the 12 best teams in the country being lumped together, and then week after week after week, you have to play one of these teams and come up with strategies. Is coaching more of a factor for you in this than you think other people might be accounting for?
Yeah, I think on the biggest stage, coaching can be a huge advantage for certain teams. Now, I'm not necessarily, coaching didn't play a huge role in picking a lot of the other games. I brought it up in Georgia's case just because they're obviously a little bit flawed. They're banged up with Carson Beck, and the difference between Kirby Smart and who he was going up against, the inexperience of someone like Marcus Freeman or Spencer Danielson at Boise State, like that gap is so massive. It gives a clear edge to Georgia in those particular matchups, but it matters all across the board. Dan Lanning has already proven he's already played in a bunch of big games, even though he hasn't been to the playoff before. He's proven that he gets his team prepared. That moment that you referenced earlier at the end of the Ohio State game proved how well prepared he is for the big stage. Steve Sarkisian at Texas also making the playoff last year, having played and coached in a lot of big games as an assistant at Alabama. Obviously, they had some big games at Texas last year when he went on the road and beat Alabama, beat Nick Saban in Alabama in a road upset last year, proving that you can do it in those types of matchups. It does matter. And so it definitely raises some doubts. It didn't have a huge impact on how I filled out this particular bracket because some of the more inexperienced coaches were going up against each other, like that Boise State, Penn State matchup. Spencer Danielson and James Franklin have never been anywhere close to this stage before. So I don't think it gives a significant edge to one or the other. Danielson's more inexperienced. Maybe he'll come up with a great game plan and prove that he is that type of coach. Who knows? But at this point, I can't really factor that in too much. And then some of the other matchups just seem a little bit more even, like, a Dan Lanning versus Steve Sarkisian matchup. I think both of those guys are very good coaches and we'll have those teams prepared. It didn't really sway my pick in that way. But when the disparity is huge, like it would be in Georgia versus Notre Dame or Georgia versus Boise State, yeah, it can definitely play a role in who you should pick.
Yeah, and if we talk to our site editor, Ray Summerlin, he'll tell you don't bet on James Franklin in any big games.
Yep.
So you got the people that don't like James Franklin in big games. You got the people that don't like Ryan Day in big games. And that coaching mismatch, Ryan Day versus Dan Lanning. I mean, the four coaches that I hear you, or sorry, the three coaches that you're talking the best about in terms of the ones that you seem to have the most respect for winning these games, Kirby Smart, Dan Lanning, and Steve Sarkisian. Three of those four are making it to these games. The guys that have good teams like a Penn State, like Ohio State, but you have them falling short. They've got those coaches that sometimes make problematic decisions in James Franklin and Ryan Day. So I agree with Nick D. And Nick, I appreciate you changing. I think you're the guy who changed your name here. It's a lot easier for me to call you out now. I appreciate that. Coaching is insanely important in football. You and I both value coaching a ton, Ryan, I think from a play calling and from a predictive standpoint, more so than a lot of other people do out there. So we are certainly in agreement with you there, Nick. Anything looking back on this, Ryan, that like if one thing were changed, you would have somebody go through entirely differently? I know you said if Tennessee could pull off the upset, you could see the potential for them making a run. What was like kind of one of the things that you were most on the fence about making here, or you think could have changed a lot of your bracket if you had chosen something different?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the bracket that I filled out, obviously it's mostly chalk, especially when you're looking at the seeds. But half of these games, if we include the spreads that you read out for the hypothetical matchups, half of these games that I've laid out here, if the bracket played out this way, would be more than a touchdown spread. So you're not going to pick too many upsets if that's the case, right? And I'm only picking one upset in one of those games with the big spread in that Boise State Penn State matchup. So I think that's how you should approach the bracket. Don't pick a lot of upsets, but maybe pick one. That's probably the best way to do it in football. There's not going to be a ton of major upsets. The one game that I maybe struggled with a little bit that could dramatically change it would probably be that Notre Dame Georgia game. Because, like I said, the coaching was really the major thing that swung me towards picking Georgia. If you ignored coaching and just looked at how the two teams match up with each other, you can make a good argument that Notre Dame matches up pretty well, and it's more of a toss-up type of game, and Notre Dame could easily win that if that proves to be the case. If Marcus Freeman has his team fully prepared, more so than he has in big games in the past, they could win that game. And if they do, Notre Dame's probably going to get past Boise State, and they're probably in the championship game. So, like I said, the Ohio State-Oregon game on that other side of the bracket, that's probably determines who goes to the championship game. On the other side of the game is probably the Notre Dame-Georgia game. If Notre Dame does get past that big test against Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs, they probably march past Boise State relatively easily and right into the title game where they get a matchup with either Oregon or Ohio State or possibly Texas.
Very interesting. It's going to be so much fun watching these games, seeing how they play out, and betting on these games. Exile says, Ryan, excellent insight. I'm sure everybody out there echoes his sentiments. I certainly do. And as a reminder, Ryan here is picking just outright winners, filling in a bracket like all the experts are going to be doing as we head into the college football playoff, like all the experts do when we're doing March Madness as well. But he is going to be back with us not only this Friday, but every single other Friday like he normally does, helping us bet on these games as they come up. All these games are Friday, Saturday type games. One Friday night, the rest are on Saturday. We're going to be breaking down all of those games in the first round, in the quarterfinals, and he's going to be giving us winners from a side and total perspective there as well. So we're looking forward to having Ryan back on the show. And as a reminder, if you guys think this is super easy, also, you don't have to make that many picks. It's pretty straightforward. It's not like a March Madness bracket. So you guys should be able to fill one of these out. You want to participate with us and have a chance to win $4,000 in cash and prizes, as well as beat Ryan's bracket. See if you can do one a little bit differently and try to beat Ryan's bracket, which, by the way, why don't we just do this? If you guys are able, whoever wins this contest, I'm not sure what the prize is to first place. The other guys at the who work with me are figuring all of the prize structure out, how we're breaking out that $4,000 to first, second, third place, etc. But if you win first place and your bracket is better than Ryan's, if you get more right than Ryan does right now, I'll toss in an extra $250 on top of that. So an extra $250 cash to the first place winner. I just made that decision right now. So a lot of prizes available for you guys there if you want to participate with us. And I'll dig into right now how you can get involved. But first, Ryan, I've taken up a lot of your time already. Thank you so much for joining us and walking through this inaugural college football playoff bracket. It was a ton of fun. We really value your insight. Thanks for joining us. Make sure you guys are following Ryan on X. You saw his Twitter handle there at Ryan_McCrystal, but also you can tune in on the Friday show. There it is. Producer threw it up there. You can also follow on the Friday show as well. He's going to be back with us in just a few days to talk about the upcoming college games. We're going to hit both the totals, the sides for these playoff games, but also all the other bowl games where Ryan sees something of value. Another reminder, if you guys are big college football fans, we have the college football bowl article up on the website. It is the college football bowl game predictions, picks, and analysis for every game. If you are doing confidence pools, we talked about this a little bit on Friday, but if you are doing confidence pools, if you're filling out your bracket to do confidence pools, you can use Ryan's insight there. That is up on the website as well. So as a reminder, as we conclude here, we are doing a college football postseason bowl game special as well as our NFL playoff special. So you can get involved. Today is the very last day that you can get everything at $100 off. Use the code SHOW50, and that will get you $100 off the final price that you would end up paying tomorrow. The early bird discount ends tonight. Our bowl record, 35-8 over the last 3 years. We went 9-0 last year. Can't do better than 9-0. 10-0, yes, that's better. 9-0 last year. Because we didn't have a bowl game yet in our early games, we are also doing player props. For the first year ever, we did player props for college football. We had a winning season. I'll get the final results tallied up and share them with you later. But we had a winning season in our college props, and we gave away a bonus college prop for the game. It was on Saturday. That one won. So we gave away a bonus prop. We're already ahead of the game here. If you bought the playoff package, postseason package, you already had a winner there. I know not everybody can play college props, so we've got all of our sides and totals. We're going to start coming out with those this afternoon. We're going to start releasing some of our first college football bowls. You can buy the package, get you into the NFL playoffs as well as college bowls. As a reminder, $4,000 prizes for our playoff bracket challenge for college football. We'll also have thousands of dollars worth of prizes. Don't know the exact number yet because we're still 3 weeks out from the NFL playoffs, but we will be doing a giveaway of cash and prizes for our NFL playoff pick'em, where you reward people who pick most accurately all of the teams moving through the NFL playoffs. We're going to be working with a partner to help grade out all of those picks and reward the champions as well. So we've got details on both of those contests. Lots of money at stake here to be given away this holiday season to you guys for trying to win in these pick'em challenges. Of course, also, we're going to be looking to win you money from our betting recommendations. That being said, let's see. Peter says, what made you want to move out of San Francisco? I never lived in San Francisco. So nothing made me want to leave there. Although I do love the East Coast from the timing perspective. That said, I do keep like a West Coast body clock, but I love being on the East Coast because I have more time to prepare ahead of games. Might sound a little backwards, but like last night, I was working till 3:30 last night on the East Coast time, 3:30 a.m. So I tend to keep more of a West Coast body clock. Part of the reason that I do that in many cases during the week is because from like 11 p.m. East Coast until like 3:30 a.m., the board is not moving. The odd screen doesn't really move that much. I can get a ton of work, do all of my research, all my number crunching, all my analysis, all my matchups, filling out all my sheets and trying to isolate things that I'm looking at in peace and quiet, without being disturbed by market movement, without being disturbed by conference calls, without being disturbed by anybody else that I work with. And so that's a big bonus to me. And then I can get up and the board starts jumping in the morning. So not very much sleep during the season, but that's just the way that it goes. It's the best. The summer is when you catch up on your sleep, I guess you could say. And the football season is coming to a conclusion here sooner than we would like. I love, though, that the college football playoff extends it. Championship game's not until January 20th. I just saw that the NFL made an announcement while we were on the show that we've got 3 NFL games, like a triple header on Saturday. I don't know the exact date of that. I saw that was announced while we were on the show here. The unfortunate part of that triple header, from what I was looking at, was a lot of these games stink. Chargers, Patriots. You got the Patriots playing, who are out of it. Broncos, Bengals. Who knows what the Bengals will be doing in Week 17 in terms of how much they're still trying to win games, but Joe Burrow seems locked in. We've got the Hard Knocks focusing on the AFC North, and so I'm sure they're not going to want to just show up and talk about Batmobiles again and do nothing in that game. So I think they're going to try to play well. So that game could be the most interesting of the bunch. And then, of course, you got the Arizona Cardinals taking on the Rams on Saturday night. So I can't complain. More NFL on TV. They're always trying to make a buck. Don't fault them for that. Smart of them. Of course, we're going to tune in whenever they stick these games on. So that's just how this thing goes. Even if it's crappy teams, we're going to tune in and make fun of the crappy teams. And that's kind of par for the course. All right. That being said, excellent appearance by Ryan today. A lot of fun. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that as well. We'll be back on Friday where we'll be breaking down picks and predictions for this upcoming weekend. It's Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday of the NFL schedule. We'll be having Ryan join us again. We'll be having Pam Maldonado join us. We'll be having our ref expert Joe Gibbs join us. And of course, we'll get to my longest picks as well. We went 2-0 last week. I don't know what the record year to date is. I want to say it's something like 20-8 or 21-8, 21-9, something like that. I'll get the exact record to you later, but we swept the board last week. Looking to add to that as well this upcoming week. So until that point, get involved in the playoff pick'em that we've got up on the website. Go to sharp.football for more information, and we'll see you guys on Friday.